Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and this is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome everybody to Nightlight, and our thanks to Ken Quiet Hawk for that amazing introduction. You can find him and his wife at nativestorytellers.com. Tonight's show is a humdinger. It's a very exciting show. Our guest is a unique individual, and he has written a book that is truly amazing. And I had never seen the book before, but having seen it now and read up on it, I'm very curious. I'm going to have to get it and read it. Mark has actually done the reading to it, and he's going to bring his guest on and enlighten all of us. Mark, where did you ever find this amazing man?
Let's see. Tim and I have, we were talking before the show, maybe 6 years ago, we started working together, collaborating on developing shows, and about a month ago, I'm just like you, Barbara. I hadn't heard of Gef, and he Tim and I were talking. He's like, "Hey, I got this new book out, Gef the Talking Mongoose," and I was like, "Oh, okay, good for you. Is it a children's book?" And he's like, it could be like a companion piece for Brian from Family Guy. I was like, what? Like how can that fit into our talk show? It's like, oh no, it's actually a case study of this haunting. I was like, oh wow, okay, yeah, that is going to fit in perfectly with Varla. A couple weeks ago, we got Steve Asher coming up in a couple weeks, and so we it just a nice grouping of these paranormal topics, and like I said, both of us really hadn't heard about this story. I'm sure loyal English listeners in East Horsley, Barnsley, and Rotherham are familiar with it, but it's just a compelling book. And Tim, you really have something unique. It's a comprehensive book of what a cryptid, ghost, demon. Is it? We can't rule out the possibility that it was a hoax. We're going to talk about that. I don't know what to think of it, but Tim, this Gef the Talking Mongoose it was just a really captivating book. He really did an excellent job on this.
Oh, well, thank you. I think that we first ran into each other when I was doing a podcast with Mike Mott on another network called The Outer Edge, and he started finding guests for us, and he found us some really great guests as well. So, and that was maybe 5, like you said, about 5-6 years ago. Yeah,
and you were doing a show with Rick Osman as well. So we go way back, and it's I need to give you a little bit more of an introduction for any of the listeners who don't know you yet, but you've been providing commentaries on many episodes of Ancient Aliens. You're on the esteemed KCOR's radio networks exploring the bizarre. You have books on Tesla and time travel, nefarious uses of Tesla's technology, Hollow Earth, and all kinds of other topics. You've been a paranormal researcher for over 40 years. You even won a Emmy Award as a TV producer. You've really done all kinds of achievements in journalism. So, and we're just glad you're with us.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been involved with this kind of stuff really since I was a kid, even though originally I didn't want to be. I had to do a report in front of my third grade class one time about UFOs. The teacher would randomly pick headlines from a scholastic newspaper that our class used to get, and one time I got a story about UFOs. So after I gave this story, and of course, I didn't know anything about UFOs. I could have cared less. Indiana boy. I was interested in car racing and basketball. Things like that. So after I gave my class presentation, I was now the guy who believed in flying saucers and little green men from Mars, and and that was it for me. I mean, people, there's the guy who believes in flying saucers and all that stuff. But what was interesting was that people would make fun of you, when there was a crowd around, but then later they'd come back when it was just them, and they'd say, "Yeah, I don't believe in this stuff, but," and then they'd proceed to tell me a story, about they saw, his family saw a flying saucer over their house, or their house was haunted by, great grandmother Lorene, or something like that. And really, that's how it's progressed from me. Is people who come and tell me these interesting stories, these fantastic stories that a lot of people may have not have any kind of knowledge base about, say, UFOs or the paranormal or whatever. It's a little bit more difficult now because reality television. There's so many of these shows. I mean, oh my gosh, practically every paranormal subject has their own TV show. Bigfoot has a TV show. I mean, I'm waiting for the Loch Ness Monster, to have their own weekly reality series. But when I was growing up, that kind of knowledge really wasn't as prevalent. So people would have these experiences, and they wouldn't know how to categorize them, in their brain. Because we all have like these little, basically like cupboards in our brain that we file away our daily experiences. But you have you have an experience where, say, like a UFO lands in front of you, and little green men come out and steal your tires. that's a little bit more difficult to file away in that card catalog in your head. So people will come to me and they'll tell me these stories because they were afraid that if they told anybody else, they'd be laughed at, and they probably would have been. Your family's the worst. You tell your family members, unless they've had the same experience, they're going to laugh you away from the Thanksgiving table. But when they come to me and tell me these stories, they just want to be heard. They want to have that acknowledgement that they're not crazy. That maybe something actually did happen to them. And that's what I'll tell them. I'll say, that's a great story, but you're not alone. There's been, thousands, maybe, millions of people throughout history who have had similar experiences. And, we don't know what's going on, but you're not crazy. And you can see with a lot of these people that weight lifted from their shoulders. And a lot of times that's it. I mean, they may never tell that story to anybody else again, but just that one chance, to tell the story and to realize that they're not alone, that they're not crazy from their experience, that means the world to a lot of people. And that's really what drew me into this were these personal experiences that you won't see written up in books or, in magazines or now on reality television. And they're so widespread, and practically I think everybody at least one time in their life has had some kind of unusual, off-the-wall experience. And, some people will ignore it or try to explain it away as something mundane. Other people will let it fester the rest of their life because they just don't know how to deal with it.
Tim, what is it about you that makes people feel comfortable that they could talk about such a sensitive experience?
Well, it started, of course, like I said earlier. People were, friends would make fun of me because they thought I was just, Mr. Flying Saucer or Mr. UFO. That's Tim Beckley's claim to fame. But I don't know. I've always kind of had that ability that people feel comfortable talking to me, and when they find out that I'm interested or that I write about or investigate the paranormal or and related subjects, practically everybody will say, "Oh yeah, I've had, or I know somebody who's had," and oh my gosh, I mean, at a party or something like that, and I'll just have people just talk my ear off. One group will finish it up, and then a new group will come by and start talking. So it's just kind of progressed from that over the years, and plus when I was working in television. I kind of had this. I'm not quite sure what you would call it. It really wouldn't be a job because I never got paid for this. But I knew all the other reporters, not only at the stations that I worked at, but all the other stations in the market, and I would instruct these reporters and producers and assignment editors a lot of times on how to effectively do a report. Do either a news segment, or sometimes I'd have the newspaper reporters come to me and ask me, but how to deal and write about this kind of stuff without making it kitschy or jokey. Be serious about it, because. And I'm sure that you have seen this yourself. I mean, so many, especially local news reporters, though the national news can be, just as bad about this. something unusual happens in their town, UFO sightings, something like that. Anymore, they'll just go and they'll play, like the X-Files music and write this, silly little story about what happened. And it's so cliched and just so lazy. It's the lazy reporter's way of dealing and producing a piece like that. So what I would do is that, I would help a lot of these reporters on how to cover something like that responsibly, how to get the best information from the witnesses, and how not to make it look stupid. That's what I would tell these reporters. Don't take the easy way out. Don't be lazy. Do a good story. Consider this story just as important as you would, say, like a city council meeting or the 5-car wreck down on the highway, that sort of thing. And when I was doing this, I was very pleased that a lot of the people who would come to me and ask, for my help, really did learn and grow on how to do responsible reporting with this kind of phenomena.
Okay, well, Tim, I don't want to be a lazy reporter. I want to be like my hero, Carl Kolchak, and start delving into the Gef legend. So, how did you, learn about this case? I guess it's a haunting case study.
Yeah, well, and it's pronounced Gef, like
Gef,
JEF.
okay.
I suppose that it meant it to be spelled kind of like
Chaucer, the Geoffrey Chaucer. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, I first heard about this. I was around.
Just another third grade story.
Well, no, this would have been more like middle school or junior high, as we called it then. I ran across a book by a parapsychologist called Nandor Fodor, who did a lot of his research, investigation, and writing in the 40s, 50s, up until the 1960s. And he had a book called Between Two Worlds that had been re-released as a paperback. And I just happened to run across this and buy it at the drugstore. And one of the stories that he had in there was about Gef the Talking Mongoose. Nandor Fodor had actually gone to the location in 1936, which was kind of late in how everything was had played out previously. He had actually written the Irvings and had requested that they allow him to come to their farmhouse on the Isle of Man and spend about 7 days living at the farmhouse with the Irvings, and then the Irvings, being the nice people that they were, said, "Sure, come over, but don't expect anything, because at this point Gef has gotten more surly than he used to be, and probably won't talk to you." And sure enough, he never did. There was some poltergeist activity. Minor poltergeist activity while Mr. Fodor was there, but Gef never talked, and Nandor Fodor was so disappointed he actually wrote a letter to Gef and sent it to the farmhouse and told Gef how disappointed he was that Gef would not make an appearance, even after Mr. Fodor had bought Gef gifts of biscuits and chocolate, which were Gef's favorite foods. Later, Nandor would write about his experiences and his other investigations and speculations on what he thought was going on there, and had it printed up in a book called Haunted People. Later on, he included that chapter in a later book called Between Two Worlds, the one that I had run across. So, like I said, I was around 12 years old at the time, and so I was already familiar with this case, though some of the writings that I have run across over the years between that time and then when I started writing my book, you talk about lazy journalism. You could tell that some of these stories had been cribbed from earlier stories because there was obvious mistakes, glaring errors, in fact, that just seemed to get perpetuated over time. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with my book was to really go back to the original sources, the original writings from the people who lived in this house where Gef made his appearance, the original notes taken by the investigators and reporters who were there at the time, Tim Beckley, my good friend who is also my publisher. He was able to locate a book written by the parapsychologist Harry Price, who did an extensive investigation on this. The book was called The Haunting of Cashin's Gap. It was released in 1935. Unfortunately, it only sold about 400 copies and was never reprinted. So Tim Beckley was able to find somebody who had an original copy and was kind enough to scan it for us. And so I was able to include this book in my book, and like I said, this book has not seen the light of day. There may have been some sections that had been, put online here or there, but the full book in its entirety has never been reprinted since 1935. And so, we're very happy to include it in my book and really just bring to light a lot of information that probably, generations, literally, of paranormal investigators who have been interested in Gef have never had access to.
So, as we get started understanding the story, like with this talking mongoose, it's set in England. We have to learn about how Gef ended up on the Isle of Man, since mongooses aren't indigenous to England.
No, definitely not.
So maybe we need to put that little piece of the puzzle out there for the audience, and start bringing all the information together.
Right. Well, going back from the very beginning, which this case started in 1931, and it involved a family named the Irvings. The father was named James Irving, his wife Margaret, and at that time they had a 12-year-old daughter by the name of Vori, which is Manx for Mary. The Irvings had been on this farm. The farm's name was Cashin's Gap, or Dorlish Cashin, the Manx term for it. They had already been living there for probably 16 years, I think. Jim Irving, Jim and Margaret Irving had originally been from Liverpool, England. He had been a piano and organ salesman, and a pretty successful one at that. They were upper middle class. Both were very well educated. Jim spoke several languages, and at one point, because of World War I, his sales started dropping off, and he was already, rather advanced in years. So they decided that he was going to retire from his piano selling, and they were going to buy this farm on the Isle of Man, which is an island that sits in the Irish Sea, in between England and Ireland. His wife Margaret had family, distant, cousins that lived on the island. And at one time, while they were visiting this family, they ran across a notice that this farm was for sale, and Jim thought that this would be a good a way for him to retire. That they would take their money and they would buy this farm, and that he would be a gentleman farmer, which is a farmer that really doesn't do any work. That all the hired hand does the work, and he collects the money. Unfortunately, the dream ended up being different from reality. The farm wasn't very successful, and so Jim and his family had to do practically all of the work. And at the point that they had moved to the island, they already had 2 children that were already grown, and they lived on the island with their parents for a couple of years, but then they moved back to England to start families of their own. And then Margaret got pregnant with Vori, kind of an unexpected surprise or gift, depending on how you look at it. So here you have these 2 people who were thinking about, they moved to the island to retire, and now here they have a baby. So by the time that Gef made his appearance, Vori was 12 years old. All right, Jim would be in his early 60s, and then Margaret, the mother, was just a few years younger than Jim. What had happened, and the story, there's kind of some conflicting information about this, but probably the story that makes the most sense that I have run across was that Vori and Jim one day came across this animal that they said kind of looked like a weasel in the farmyard, that it was chasing the chickens around, and this thing was it was barking at the chickens one minute, and then it was meowing at them next, and it was just, kind of almost like a mockingbird type of thing. It was making all kinds of different noises. So they chased it off, but apparently it moved inside of the house, because shortly thereafter they started hearing something scrambling around, inside the walls of the house. Now, the farmhouse that they had moved to even in the early 1930s, was very old. It had been built probably sometime in the middle 19th century, though some other researchers think that it could have been built even earlier than that, maybe as far back as medieval times, because unlike other farmhouses in the area, this house was fairly good size. It had 2 stories. It had a downstairs with a kitchen, and then upstairs had 2 bedrooms, which was rather unusual. It was made of stone, so when the Irvings first bought it, Jim and some hired hands actually went and put wooden paneling on the inside to act as kind of like insulation. So you had about a 4-inch gap that was in between this wooden paneling and then the original stone walls. And apparently, whatever this creature was, it had gotten inside and had now taken up residence, living in this 4-inch gap. So Jim started putting out poison and, rat traps and, those sort of things, and nothing worked. The thing continued to scrabble around on the walls. And at one point, kind of out of frustration, Jim barked at it like a dog. And that's how it started. This amused Vori, so she would meow at it like a cat, and it would meow back. And pretty soon, they noticed that it was making noises almost like a baby would make as it's learning how to, assorted nouns and vowels, and it progressed from there. Vori would read nursery rhymes out loud, and this thing started to parrot the nursery rhymes back. And then it got even more bizarre. You think that's bizarre. It got even more bizarre because this thing developed an intelligence and a personality. It wasn't just parroting words and noises back. It started talking on its own. And it just, and once it started talking, they couldn't get it to shut up. That was one of the problems with whatever this thing was. And even though it later identified itself as a mongoose, nobody knows for sure. I mean, nobody ever really got, with the exception of the time that they think that they saw it, like outdoors in the farmyard. Nobody ever got really more than just a fleeting glimpse of it after that time. But it said that it was a mongoose that in the early 1900s, it had been living in India, and that it had been trapped because a local farmer on the island had bought a bunch of mongoose to have brought over to take care of the growing rabbit population. And so this thing said that it had been trapped in India and then brought to the island and then released with other non-talking, I guess, fellow mongoose. Now, the weird thing about that story is that a couple of years later, Jim Irving found out that story was true. He came across an old newspaper in the local newspaper. I think one of the reporters actually turned him on to it. That had that story. Local farmer buys mongoose to take care of rabbit population, and so whether or not this thing that was living in their house was actually part of that group of mongoose that had been released, the story that it told was true. And, at first they called it Jack. But later it, as I said, it developed a personality of its own. It said that it wanted to be, its name was Gef. It wanted to be called Gef. And it spelled it out, Gef, which apparently Jeff couldn't spell very well because probably he was trying to spell, like I said earlier, Geoff. But Gef stuck. And that's what he went by. He was Gef the Talking Mongoose.
Okay, so Tim, when you were talking about the early stages of the communication between Jim and Vori and Jeff, there developed a little bond between those. Was at first a little closer with Vori. Let's profile her a little bit. The first-hand accounts that are included do make note of the importance of her age and other things going on in her life as a 12, 13-year-old. So let's look at how Jeff and Vori bonded at first. At
first, nobody bonded with Jeff. they were afraid of him naturally. The family immediately suspected that they were being haunted, and why not? You've got a voice coming out of your wall at various locations, and it would talk in the kitchen one moment, and then the next thing you know, it was talking from the living room, and then the next thing you know, it was talking from upstairs. So, naturally, if something like that was happening to you, you'd be like, oh, we got a ghost in our house. And they even went as far as to ask this voice, "You're a ghost, aren't you?" Which Gef always denied. He'd always say, "No, I'm not a ghost. Definitely not a ghost. Living animal here, just extra clever little mongoose." But at first, because of this suspicion, there was definitely some clashes of personalities, so to speak, between the Irvings and Gef. Gef, like I said earlier, would not shut up. He especially liked to talk when everyone was trying to go to bed at night. And sometimes Gef would talk up until like 3 o'clock in the morning, which, if you're a farmer, you have to get up at the crack of dawn anyway. 3 o'clock, that would only give you about an hour or so of sleep before you'd have to get up, take care of the livestock. So, and then as well, Gef cursed like a sailor. He had used that kind of language, but Gef certainly did. Early on, they became so concerned that they moved Vori out of her room and into theirs, which really enraged Gef. And he went on kind of like a path of destruction. He wrecked things in the house. He screamed, all of the time. He made like huge bangs and raps in the walls that kept everybody up. And he threatened them. He said, "I don't care where you move her to, I'll find her, and if I wanted to, I could kill you all." He saying horrible things like that. But eventually, things kind of calmed down, and they moved Vori back into her room, and then for a while, Vori and Gef were, kind of like a good friend. She was fascinated naturally by what was going on. He would tell her stories about what was going on around the island. Gef was a very bad gossip. He would go allegedly to the neighbors' houses and listen in on their conversations, and then come back and tell Vori all about what was going on, with the people down the mountain, or what was going on, what was being said at the bus station. Gef would travel down to the nearest town, which was named Darby, and go to the bus station and listen in on the bus drivers, the mechanics, and the people traveling by the bus, and then come back and tell these stories to Vori. And naturally, some of these stories probably weren't proper for a 12-year-old girl to be hearing, and Margaret Irving, in fact, had to tell Gef several times that she doesn't allow that kind of talk in this house. Eventually, though, Gef started to gravitate more towards Jim Irving. Jim really became naturally fascinated by what was going on in his house, and had gotten to the point where he was keeping a journal, a daily journal, of what Gef did that day, what he said, what happened. And thank heavens he did. I mean, he kept this journal from 1931 to about 1936, 35, something like that. So, I mean, every day for all those years, he kept a journal of Gef's activity, which was really valuable for me and other researchers in putting this book together. Vori would later on say that that at first, her and Gef were practically inseparable, but that once he kind of became more Jim's, and I'm not going to, you want to use the word pet, but I'd see the pet really isn't a proper term. Companion, maybe, I don't know. That she actually became. She started wishing that Gef would just go away because her school chums made fun of her. They called her the Dalby Spook. She ended up being kind of ostracized by the community and where she went to school. And later on, she said that if it had been up to her and her mother, that they never would have told anybody else about Gef, that they just would have kept it a secret. But it was their dad who actually started talking to reporters about what was going on. And in fact, years later, when Vorey was around 52 years old, a reporter for Fate magazine actually was able to track her down, and she agreed to talk to him. She had never talked to anybody after she had moved away from the house when she became an adult, but she agreed to talk to this guy. And she said that Gef basically, that everything that was reported about Gef was true. It wasn't a hoax. She didn't hoax it. Her mom or dad didn't hoax it. That whatever it was, it actually happened, but she wished it never did, because it did. It ruined her life. She said that she was afraid to ever get married because she thought that no man would ever want to marry her if they found out that she was, that Vorey, that person who was involved with the Talking Mongoose situation. So I mean, here you have this poor girl, and I really feel sorry for her because from the age of 12 for the rest of her life, she kind of had this sword of Damocles hanging over her head, constantly wondering if somebody was ever going to find out who she was, and what was going to happen. Was she going to get fired from her job? Were her friends going to turn away from her? Because she saw that all happening, when she was a kid. Was this going to also happen when she was an adult? So she just refused to talk about it.
Okay, and Tim, you gave us a solid background of the family, what was going on inside the house, and you do bring in Tim Beckley. You have some other friends who collaborate with some other sections where there is a documented case of the squonk from northern Pennsylvania, and you get a talking squirrel case. What did your co-authors bring to understanding Gef?
The main thing was that out of all of this time, the Gef case is unique, perfectly unique. There really has not, at least as far as I have been able, and the other people that I have put on to try to locate anything closely similar to the Gef case. And so we've included in the book a couple stories. Like you said, we had Paul Dale Rogers, who had the alleged talking squirrel. But this was a case where it was something that it was very brief, and then it never occurred again. And then we have a writer by the name of Hercules, who came up with this legend mythology on the East Coast about a creature called the squonk that apparently could talk. But as for other cases of allegedly of an animal that talked for as long as Gef did, and exhibited a personality and intelligence like Gef did, nobody has come up with anything even closely similar. Probably the only things that come even close to being like Gef are some cases of poltergeist hauntings that evolve into a talking poltergeist, which is they're very rare on their own. We have the Bell Witch case from Tennessee in the early 19th century. She's probably, or it, however you want to describe it, is probably the one case that has any similarities because the Bell Witch talked incessantly for years. The difference was, there were similarities that, the Bell Witch liked to gossip as well. She would go and, listen in on the neighbors and then come back and tell their stories. Anybody who would visit the farmhouse, the Bell Witch, and, that was the name they gave it, the witch, when actually it was just a disembodied voice. But this voice would reveal, anybody who came to their house to visit would reveal their innermost personal thoughts or demons or what have you. If you beat the dog, the Bell Witch would, old Roy here, he beat his dog before he came here, things like that. Now, Gef never conducted any kinds of violence on the Irving family or anybody else. He made threats, but he never did, while the Bell Witch was very fond of slapping people or biting them or doing all kinds of, mean and nasty things. Gef never did anything like that. There have been some other talking poltergeist cases. None of them, though, have had the length or the legs, so to speak, that lasted as long as the Gef case. Gef case is so unique. That's what makes it so fascinating, because there really there hasn't been anything else that anybody's been able to uncover, even closely similar to the Gef case, which naturally leads a lot of skeptics to come to the conclusion that it was all just a hoax, that somehow the Irvings or Vorey or somebody managed to pull this massive hoax for all of these years and then get away with it.
Okay, and some of the other case studies where there's there's like some medieval bishop or from France. I think there were some stone throwing. You have Gef doing that at times. You and your collaborators do provide some samples of cases out of history where there were similar behaviors. Is there a connection between some of these like poltergeist cases happening to the bishops or church figures and the Irvings?
Well, that would it would be great if I could give you a definitive answer, but I can't. I'm not going to say that yes, this definitely has a connection, one way or the other, because we simply don't know. The unfortunate thing, about the Gef case is that it happened at a time when and in a location when they didn't have access to say that, the farmhouse had no electricity. So there was no way that anybody could take, say, like a dictaphone there and try to catch a recording, of Gef. There was pictures taken at the location of the family, and Rory even managed to capture some pictures, supposedly, of Gef. Samples of his hair that Gef provided were examined and found to be from the family's dog. There was Harry Price
footprints.
The footprints. Harry Price sent plastiline clay for Gef to to put his feet into to try to get impression, and also bite marks. When these were examined, though, by experts in animal husbandry, they could not find any kind of correlation between these footprints and any animal that they knew. The only one that even came close, one expert said, looked kind of like a raccoon's paw, which that's kind of interesting because Gef always claimed, and then the Irvings, agreed, because they were able to catch glimpses of his front hands, that they weren't normal paws as you would think of, like an animal would have a paw. They looked, they were described almost as looking like a doll's hands. I mean, he actually had little fingers and and apparently an opposable thumb that he was able to grasp things, and he claimed that that's what he used to throw things around the house in a poltergeist type fashion. One time, Margaret Irving had given Gef a bowl of porridge to eat. He had what they called his sanctum, which was on top of their enclosed staircase in the living room. And he was up on top of that, eating this porridge with a spoon, like any polite mongoose would, I suppose. And they had given him a candle so he could see what he was doing, because this was night, and the house was dark anyway, even in the daytime. And at night, it was almost inky black. So you always had to have candles or lanterns to see your way around. But at one point, the shadow of Gef, reflected by this candle, they could see, and he actually held up his paw to see that it looked like a little hand. So again, what are you dealing with here? You mentioned some of these older cases of poltergeist hauntings and talking poltergeist. A lot of these from the 1600s, but nowhere do we have anything even coming close to being similar with these older haunting and poltergeist cases that we do with the Gef case, because not only does the Gef case have incidents of poltergeist types of activity, definitely paranormal type of activity, but then we also have these more mundane, almost physical types of things, like Gef holding up his paw for people to see. The fact that he ate, his favorite foods was biscuits and chocolate. He liked lean bacon as well. He would kill rabbits for the family and bring them home for them to have for dinner. Jim Irving would recorded every time that Gef would kill a rabbit and bring it home, and it's like probably by the end of his journals, he had killed like at least 300 rabbits over the years. So I mean, here we have this really bizarre set of circumstances where it's a combination of a haunting, or is it a real creature, or a little bit of both. There's there was also a couple of cases where apparently Gef had the ability to shapeshift. Because
right.
Jim and Vori one time saw a large like a Manx cat, which is a tailless cat, in their yard, and they followed it around for a little bit, but then it just vanished in front of their eyes. Gef later would say, "That was me you saw, Jim." There was another time when a couple of gentlemen came and visited the Irvings. They were sitting in the living room, and one of them reached down and held it in his lap and was stroking it. And, they were like, what are you doing? They thought he had, like flipped his lid or something. He's like, well, I'm petting their cat. But whatever he had was invisible. Nobody else could see it but him. So, it's... The Gef case is just, it's just situation after situation of bizarre incidents that really defy, and I'll use the word conventional explanations, but okay, what I mean by conventional explanations, because, paranormal researchers have pretty much categorized, say, like poltergeist types of hauntings, into, a poltergeist will knock on the wall and steal things and throw stones and, maybe talk, and occasionally you'll see an apparition, but that's it. But, the Gef incident, it was kind of like all of the above and more, which, this is what makes this case just so not only wonderfully fascinating, but just, pull your hair out maddening as well.
And Tim, to make things, even more, compelling, as I was reading through the book, you get these, the one case where, or the sample where Vori was locked in her room when Gef was yelling, and I think one of the researchers was there. So it was really difficult for the researchers to have the whole family being observed with Gef scurrying behind the paneling and singing or shouting his obscenities, or saying, I don't want to talk because you doubt that I exist. Those little phrases that he said. So the journals that the researchers wrote, and you include in your book, there is part of the possibility of was Vori being a ventriloquist? Is this all part of a hoax? We have to bring that involved, because it was just very difficult for the whole family to be together with Gef doing his annoying chattering for 2 hours in a row.
naturally, from the very beginning, it was suspected that
Mm-hmm.
this was a hoax.
Right.
One of the very first newspaper headlines that I ran across. It said, what was it? It was along the lines of, the Manx man weasel, because early on it was called the man weasel, because he talked. Could the Manx man weasel be the daughter as a ventriloquist, or something along those lines?
Mm-hmm.
And in fact. Years later, during a radio program on the island, a friend who grew up and went to school with Vori claimed that she was really good at throwing her voice. That she could throw her voice, make it sound like it was coming out of the closet or underneath the desk, and that she could also make animal noises and do things like that. Well, when all of this happened, in the 1930s, people did believe that a ventriloquist could actually throw their voice, that they could, that a ventriloquist could make their voice come from, someplace else. Of course, we now know that that's not true. It's just it's just a matter of distraction. That ventriloquist uses a dummy. People are looking at the dummy and don't notice if the ventriloquist is actually doing the talking. So and Vori herself years later, she said, "Look, if I was that good of a ventriloquist, I would be on the stage or on television, making thousands of pounds a month or a week, rather than being a machine operator, like I am. Nobody could be that good." Some of the local reporters said that at one point, while they were out with Jim, walking on the path looking for Gef, that Vori would hang behind them and squeak and make animal noises, and then Jim would point at a hedge in front of him and say, "Yeah, that's the voice is coming from there." So I have no doubt that at times Vori did do stuff like that. Practically any poltergeist case that I have ever researched and other people have researched as well, there will be points when there are kids involved that they are going to do something to play a trick or to prime the well, so to speak. Some of these children, they would tell investigators that if they would go and do something themselves, say like when everybody's back was turned, throw something against the wall, that would kind of get the energies flowing, so to speak. Then the poltergeist would start doing stuff on their own. So, I definitely think that Vori probably was responsible for doing some stuff. But to be able to fool her parents for all of those years, I doubt that. I seriously doubt that. You have to remember that the Irvings, they already had two grown children by the time Vori came around. So they just hadn't fallen off the parent cart. They probably knew every trick in the book that a kid was going to do. Vori may have been able to fool them for a couple of days, but for years and years, no. There's no way. Nobody could be. I seriously do not think that anybody would be that gullible. And you have to realize also that Jim, especially, I mean. He was born in the 19th century, and he was a stern father. I mean, he was not going to go and and let a kid go and just run amok like that and be fooling him and everybody else. So I seriously do not think that Vorey would have been capable all those years of creating a hoax, and I don't think that Jim Irving, from the descriptions, and of course, unfortunately, by the time that we have come to all of this, everybody has passed away. Vorey was the last. She passed away, I think it was in 2005 when she died. So, and the people in the community, they suspected that possibly Margaret and Vorey were hoaxing their father, Jim, in an attempt to try to scare him enough that they would move back to England, that they wanted to move back to England, but Jim didn't want to, and that by doing this, this hoax, that it would scare him enough that he'd sell the farm and they'd move back to England. Well, if that was the case, just the opposite happened, because Jim ended up dying in the house in 1945, I think, so it was. Excuse me for a second. Huh? Okay. So I really just. And of course, this is, all of my information and everybody else's information is coming, secondhand at the closest. Firsthand from Jim Irving's writings, it doesn't appear like that this family is conducting a hoax, because why? There wouldn't be any financial gain. There was never any financial gain from this case. Even Harry Price, who wrote a book about this, The Haunting of Cashin's Gap, it only sold maybe 400 copies and then was never reprinted again. So I mean, there was no money to be made from this. Their neighbors, who already probably viewed them with somewhat of a suspicion because they were the Irvings were outsiders. They weren't born on the island. They moved there from England. So after all the stuff with Gef, I mean, they probably shied away from the family even more. So to consider that the Irvings were conducting some kind of hoax, it just really seems doubtful for me, because there would have been no reason for it. So I mean, it just always has led me to believe that something unusual was going on in that farmhouse, and it's just open to anybody's interpretation on just exactly what was going on.
Yeah, and Tim, another point that's brought up in the book is that there were basically no trees on the Isle of Man, no bushes around the house. So there's, you could see if someone is approaching the house from a long distance away. No one can hide behind something, under the window and make the little ventriloquist sounds with the people being in the living room with the investigator, and then you might get scurrying in different parts of the house. It doesn't add up that it's a hoax.
Right,
and I was just going to say, since it seems unlikely that it's a hoax, there are in the the journals from the London psychic group that comes out to the island, and they do talk about that Vori is at an age where it's like these the medium skills are like at their strongest, and they eventually like her Vori's skills would seem to taper off, which was unusual. That was brought up in the McDonald's journals. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll say this first: is that the Isle of Man, there are trees, on the island, and there are bushes and hedges as well. Where Cashin's Gap was located, though, it was on top of a very high hill, a rocky hill. And there weren't any trees around the house. There was the one of the paths that led away from the house at a certain point had hedges on either side, or henges as they're called. But as for around the house, you're absolutely correct. I mean, there would have been no place for anyone to sneak up on and try to hoax them. You had the outbuildings, the barn, things like that, but they were quite a distance from the house. And as well, the Irvings had geese. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with geese, but geese are much better than dogs at alerting you if anybody or anything strange is coming up to the house, because they will make a fuss that will wake up anybody in a couple mile distance. So the thought that maybe like somebody, a neighbor or somebody like that, may have been hoaxing the family is really silly, and it wouldn't have been able to happen. Now, a number of visitors to the house. You had mentioned earlier about how at times it was difficult to have all three family members together at one point to be able to tell if somebody, was trying to imitate the voice of Gef. And I should say also that it was reported that Jeff's voice was extremely high-pitched, squeaky. It didn't sound human. People always described it as just being very high-pitched and not sounding like it came from a normal human's voice. But there were some occasions when, say, like Captain McDonald, who had been sent to the farm more than a couple of times by Harry Price, and had got to know the Irvings extremely well, and visited them a number of times. But he was able to observe all three family members very closely at times that Gef was talking or doing things, because again, Gef would throw things from tiny cracks in the wall at people, packing needles, rocks, candy, little pieces of candy, things like that. Hitting people in the heads with them, or at times, this didn't happen to Captain McDonald, but it happened to one of their visitors, where Gef allegedly urinated on him from one of the posts on the ceiling, where Gef would run back and forth. And, they were like, oh, what, your roof is leaking. And they're like, no, that's Gef doing his natural business. And they're like, yeah. So, and it's unfortunate because, nowadays, we've got, wonderful technology that you'd be able to analyze something like that to tell, the DNA, where is this coming from, if, this was actually, a physical creature, even though it could do physical things, you'd be able to tell just exactly where that urine was coming from. But going back to Captain McDonald, there was a couple of times when Jim Irving would send Vory, who naturally was had been assumed that somehow that she was producing Jeff's voice either through natural or maybe, as you said, almost like a medium, mediumistic abilities. But they sent her out to collect chicken eggs from the barn, which was a distance from the house, but Captain McDonald could keep his eye on her, but Jeff continued to talk in the house. So, unless Vory was really good at throwing her voice vast distances, to me, I mean, that really seems to, preclude that she was hoaxing it. Now, as you mentioned, there were visitors that were spirit mediums themselves, and they always came away with the impression that there was some kind of connection between Vory and Jeff, that somehow whatever Jeff was, that it was drawing energy from Vory. And Nandor Fodor himself, he speculated that Jeff was a creation of all three of them. The entire Irving family. Possibly because Fodor was a student of Freud, so he kind of tended to look at paranormal situations with a Freudian viewpoint. And he thought that possibly that because the Irvings felt trapped and out of place and living in isolation on this farmhouse, on top of this hill in the middle of nowhere, that somehow their collective unconsciousness had produced this thing, this creature, as Jeff. But some of the psychic mediums felt that there was some kind of connection between Jeff and Vory. But again, Jeff always denied that he was a ghost, except sometimes he would be joking around and kind of like yanking the family's chain. One time, he said to him, what was it? He said that I'm the ghost of a man in the form of a weasel, and I will haunt you with the sounds of clanking chains. He claimed at one time that he was the Holy Spirit. Or he was the fifth dimension, the eighth wonder of the world. Just the very bombastic types of boast and things like that. But he always insisted that he wasn't a ghost, which it could be methinks that perchance he protests too much, type of situation. The Isle of Man has a rich tradition of fairies and elves and apukas, elemental types of spirits. And Jeff, a lot of times, seems very reminiscent to me of some of the old stories of house spirits or spirits of the hearth, as they were called. Which would be like an elemental type of spirit that would live at a house, and it always stayed at the same house. The family could move, but the house spirit would always be there. And if the spirit liked you, in the form of like fairies and brownies, it would take care of you. It would take care of help take care of the livestock. It would bring you gifts. It would go to the neighbor's house and steal things and bring them to you, which Jeff was fond of doing. If you fed it, it would return the favors, which again is very very reminiscent of the things that Gef did. So as some of these early spirit mediums concluded, Gef may have been some kind of elemental spirit that either lived in the house or lived in the land, around the landscape, that somehow became attached to the family, attached to the house, and through whatever means was able to gain the energy to become really a lot more intelligent and a lot more self-aware than it seems like a lot of these elemental spirits are, and for like I said, really for quite a long time. So there must have been a lot of energy to be had, either from the Irvings or from the landscape. One of the things that I attempted to do for the book, but I was never able to find anything conclusive enough to include more than just a few paragraphs, was to look at to see if there was any ley lines that intersected in that area, lines of force with Earth energies, because I suspect because the area close to the farmhouse, it does appear like that there were some very ancient fortifications, maybe some monolith types of constructions at one time. But of course, by the time the Irvings were living there, these things had been, destroyed, plowed under, taken away. So we don't really know. But I do suspect that that area probably had some kind of Earth energies going on there, which may have contributed to the ability of Gef to be so, self-sustaining for the length of time that he was.
Yeah, and Tim, there's some information brought up about a mass hallucination. Yeah, I think we can kind of rule that situation out. To kind of look at the Phoenix Lights. You just can't explain away that experience where all these waking people observed this huge triangular craft in the sky. It's not working out either. Like, someone hiding in the bushes. Well, there weren't bushes. So that doesn't work either. This was the story of the Gef case is set around the time when, somewhere in that, about this time Gef appears. Wasn't that when that the first photo of Nessie showed up, and then you get some of those little fairy photos, that they were proven to be basically photoshopped, early 19th century or early 20th century photoshopped. So there's there's a little bit of evidence there that this could be faked, but if you look at the entirety that you do include, you have to look at the hair clippings and the little paw prints, objective people from the London Paranormal Institute. There just seems to be too much evidence that there was something really going on there.
Sure. Well, and you're correct about the Loch Ness monster. The famous what's called the surgeon's photo came out.
That
that came out. I think it was 1931, and the fairy photographs that Sir Conan Doyle had popularized. I mean, those took place earlier, years earlier, and those
a little earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, that was earlier, and those had been, those were finally determined to be fake, and just very simple fakes too. The girls had cut pictures out of magazines and had used hat pins to prop them up, on the leaves and things like that, and then just take selfies of each other with them. So yeah, I mean, you can never, in a case like Gef, rule out a hoax. I mean, all the evidence, that we have, all of the writing, all the people who have visited, sure. I mean, it could have been a hoax. Never rule that out. I mean, never underestimate the ability of some people, for whatever reason, to pull this off. And fool people. Nowadays, when people put on a really good hoax, I mean, there's some really good reasons, especially with social media as rampant as it is, and television and all of that. But back in Jeff's time. And again, you have to remember how isolated this family was. To pull off a hoax like this for the extended period of time that this all took place, just really, one would just have to ask why. And who has the energy, to do this for so long?
Yeah, and Tim, it just sounds like if it was a hoax, it backfired because you have a few photos, family photos in your book where the being kept up all night with this animal just incessantly talking, and you can't sleep. The the whole neighborhood thinks you're a bunch of weirdos. It took its toll on the family. After a couple of days, it seemed like it would have gotten to be old, but this went on for years, and
yes.
There are photos that it look like it's their faces are careworn. The hoax just really doesn't seem to work out. The mass hallucination. Did they ever feel like they need to bring in an exorcist to finally get rid of Gef? Did that ever happen?
No, that was never, and of course nobody back then had ever heard of, exorcism. I mean, that didn't become a popular word till after, the book and the movie, back in the 70s. The closest the Irvings, ever did to try to do something like that was right at the beginning when they thought that they were dealing, with, some kind of varmint in the wall where they, tried to use poison and traps to kill it. But I never ran across anything after that they attempted to use, say, like a psychic or a medium to get rid of Gef. And in fact, especially Jim became very interested in trying to find out, just exactly what Gef was and what was going on, and to try to get as much information as he could. And to do this, he invited people, investigators, paranormal investigators, psychic mediums, anybody who was willing to travel all that way to the island and come and visit and see. But they were constantly being frustrated by Gef. Because a lot of times Gef just absolutely refused to perform. Especially Harry Price visited the farm for a few days, and Gef had told the Irvings that before Price showed up, he said that, well, Harry Price is a disbeliever. He's just going to come out here to try to disprove that I exist, so I'm just going to go away. And he did. He never showed up, never talked, never did anything. And then, after Price left, Gef showed back up again. That happened a number of times, when some of these more high-profile investigators would show up. Now, on the other hand, it's like I said, Captain McDonald, who was a friend of Harry Price and eventually became a friend of the Irvings as well, visited the farmhouse a number of times. And, at first when he went there, Gef refused to talk or to do any of his tricks, but eventually he got to trust Captain McDonald, and McDonald heard him talk and saw some of his tricks, throwing things out of the wall and things like that, and became convinced, that this was, whatever it was, that it was actually happening, that this wasn't a hoax, it wasn't Vory, tricking everybody, or the Irvings, tricking everybody. It got to the point where Margaret Irving especially, really, she was the one that got the most frustrated with Gef, because say like after he refused to talk when Harry Price showed up, when he finally did come around, Margaret Irving just basically told him, well, why'd you show up? You should just leave now. He says, you come here and you talk and you cause us problems, and then when somebody from the outside comes and wants to prove that we're not crazy, you refuse to show yourself. So why don't you just get the hell out? And in fact, it was they said that it Gef apologized, just over and over again, and was apparently almost brought to tears because Margaret was so mad at him. Yet, time and again, when somebody that Gef didn't like apparently would show up, he would just disappear, and then these people would go away suspecting that that the Irvings were perpetuating some kind of hoax. So I can imagine the frustration and the anger, especially with Margaret. I know that Jim Irving would get frustrated, and it doesn't. The records don't really show too much about if he got angry, but I'm sure that he had to have. But he was always kind of the peacemaker between, say, like Vory and Margaret and Gef. So if Gef did something that angered the women of the house, then it would be up to Jim to say, "Oh, now come on, it's not that bad." But I'm sure that he himself, Jim Irving, would just get just really frustrated about what was going on.
Yeah, it is. Tim, it sounds almost like the cartoon talking frog.
Yes, you're not the first one to bring that up.
Okay, that's basically what it's like, and guy who has the frog tries all these different ways to get the frog to talk to people, but he won't. And then when they're just the two of them are together, it just won't shut up. And I could see, you're kind of back to, if it's a hoax, it's not. It just kind of backfiring on the family. And one of the other researchers does bring up this interesting point. I like the term the folie à deux, where one has a stronger imagination than the just say a weaker person, and they just kind of draw them the other weaker person into their little fantasy world. Yeah, I think we can rule that one out. There's several different the several researchers do bring up a number of different psychological terms, and they kind of present the pros and cons of each one. They all just kind of come to the same conclusion. We don't know what it is. There's evidence for and against Gef.
Mm-hmm. Well,
it's just such a unique story, and as of one of my friends, Angela's even said, it's an adorable story. So that's already some positive feedback. You've gotten so far in the hour and 40 minutes we've been talking about this exciting case.
If it had just been the family who experienced Gef, if everybody else who had visited the farmhouse had not had any kind of experience, then I would agree with you that this could very well be the case of where you have a dominant personality saying that something weird is happening, and then the other personalities tend to fall into line. Now Jim Irving was very much a dominant personality, but then again, Margaret, his wife, she wasn't a shrinking violet either. So, I mean, both of them had fairly strong personalities. And, you talk about that, though. It reminds me of a case where, and this actually happened, where this man visited a psychiatrist and claimed that that he was from another planet, and that and had written down all of these details about the planet that he came from, and that so him and the psychiatrist had him, write down more details about his planet, and the psychiatrist, kind of, thinking that I'll bring him along, and kind of like maybe, just kind of work this fantasy out of him. So the psychiatrist starts adding his own details, and then pretty soon the psychiatrist starts believing and adding these great details about this fantasy world, falling right into it. And finally this man said to him, hey, look, like the past couple of months, I've stopped believing in this stuff, and I've just been kind of, playing along with you. And the psychiatrist was devastated. He had fallen into that trap. So yes, I mean, I could see where an isolated family like the Irvings could get involved in some kind of multiple agreement on an apparently supernatural or paranormal case. Unfortunately, it's just not that easy, because there are a number of other eyewitnesses who had visited the farmhouse and had heard Gef and had got hit mad, by things that he had thrown at him. There was one neighbor fairly early on had reported that they had come up to the farmhouse to visit, and they could hear from the outside, as they referred to it, the animal. They could hear the animal in the house screaming and talking, and just to the point where they were a distance from the house, yet they could hear it very clearly. And then the Irvings, came outside, and all the family members were talking to these neighbors, yet the animal in the house, as they called it, still continued to scream and curse, and and I guess berate the visitors, for sneaking up on them. So I mean, you have these really great, and even though they're written down, you got dates and times and things like that, they're still anecdotal. And you know as well as I do, I mean, the scientific community just absolutely refuses to look at anecdotal cases. And what scientist really is going to pay that much attention to a talking mongoose? if they can't catch it and take it to a laboratory and make it talk to them in the laboratory, then it's not real. It doesn't exist.
Tim, one of the similarly related topics to the convincing a less dominant personality to buy into your fantasy. One of the researchers did bring up that Gef had almost become like a cult leader, and there's like strong personality trait there, and that's another interesting aspect of this comprehensive view that you take of this 4-year period of insanity inside this house.
Yes, and you see this with other poltergeist cases. Again, especially the ones that end up vocalizing, where the poltergeist or entity, whatever you'd want to call it, does become kind of the dominant personality in the household, and rightfully so, I suppose, because it really has control of all the situations. It knows how to push everybody's buttons. It's kind of like the movie posters. It knows what scares you. So when you have an unusual situation like this taking place, whatever is going on, whatever this personality or intelligence is that is doing this, it will tend to dominate everybody else in the household, either through keeping everybody on edge, scaring them at times when you least expect it, or like Gef. I think that Gef would do this a lot of times by promising that he'd be good and that he would talk to people when they would come to visit, and then disappearing. So he was constantly making these promises and getting everybody's hopes up, and then dashing them, and by doing this, you just you kind of whittle everybody else down to the point that anything then that you say, they're just going to be like grasping at straws, hoping it's true or hoping it's not true.
Yeah, Tim, we're down to about 15 minutes, and we have a few more questions we need to get to. Maybe we should not discuss how it ends, and just kind of get into more of bringing together this case and some of the other things you and Tim talk about on your show, like the cryptids, and last week with Joshua Shapiro and his crystal skulls and UFOs. Like, is there some kind of connection between all of these unexplained phenomena?
I think so. There are you have researchers and writers and investigators who say they tend to favor, UFOs or Bigfoot or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you tend to concentrate solely on one type of unusual phenomena, you tend to ignore others. I think that one of the things that that helps my point of view when it comes to the paranormal and unusual phenomena is that really from day one I've been interested in all of it. I've been interested in UFOs and ghosts and hauntings and Bigfoot and other cryptid creatures, ESP, mind control, what have you. And so I think that I have been able to see connections with all of these things, that I don't think that they are, for the most part, separate entities. I think that all of these things have some kind of underlying connection, whatever that may be. Okay, say like UFOs. Possibly there are some that are actual nuts and bolts spacecraft from visiting us from other planets.
Mm-hmm.
I think, though, that a large part of the UFO phenomena has a paranormal aspect to it, along the lines of ghosts and hauntings and poltergeists and things like that. There have been numerous cases, some of them that I've investigated myself, where people will have, say, like a UFO sighting, and then suddenly find their house haunted, or will have poltergeist experiences, or other what would be referred to as high strangeness phenomena. Take that and reverse it. I've talked to some people who would have, say, like a poltergeist just suddenly erupt in their house for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden they start seeing UFOs. People like Stan Gordon have seen a definite connection between Bigfoot sightings and UFO activity. A lot of times areas that will start experiencing UFO flaps will also start experiencing cryptid sightings as well in very close proximity. Not just Bigfoot, but another unusual cryptids. Dogmen, flying creatures that look like like pterodactyls or Mothmen or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I do believe. I don't want to say I believe, because I don't believe in anything. Let me say, I'm throwing this stuff out there, but I don't believe in anything, because belief is the killer. If you go and start believing in something, then if you're presented with new information, then you may have the tendency to not accept that new evidence, because you've already got your mindset into believing something else. I see that time and time again with people who are convinced that say like UFOs are visitors from other planets, and then presented with maybe the idea that at least some UFOs maybe have a paranormal aspect, whatever that may be. Then their minds just kind of shut down, and definitely, there are a lot of Bigfoot investigators who just absolutely, they'd get angry thinking that there may be some kind of, say, like Bigfoot UFO connection. Bigfoots are a physical primate, living in the woods, and there's no way that, that they could be paranormal or associated with UFOs or what have you. So, that, and I always tell this to, other people, especially younger people who are interested in getting involved in researching stuff, is to keep your mind open and don't find yourself falling into a tendency to want to believe, to set your mind into a belief system. Because you're not going to be a very good investigator that way, because, like I said, if you believe that Bigfoot is nothing more than an unidentified primate, North American primate, then if you're presented with some kind of contrary evidence, you're not going to look at it, and you're going to ignore it, and there's good evidence that, may disappear. So I'm always encouraging people to look at all of the evidence, even if it goes against, your belief system.
Well, and Tim, Tim Beckley and the other contributors to Gef the Talking Mongoose, everyone came together to put together every side. I think you introduce a whole lot of information. You're able to say, might be able to rule out this possibility, but you're still left with some core of a story that really can't be explained, and it kind of ties in with what you were just saying, and I just found it to be a fascinating read. And as we kind of start winding down the show, where can people get the book? Do you have any more appearances coming up to discuss it? I just really enjoyed reading it and hearing you discuss it, and hopefully more people want to follow you to upcoming shows to hear more about Gef. So,
well, the book,
where can they get the book?
The book naturally you can find it on Amazon.com. You can find it at your local bookstore, if there's any actually that exist anymore. If they're not carrying the book, you can ask them to get a copy for you. But really, I mean, Amazon's probably the fastest way to get it. You can order it from our website, which is conspiracyjournal.com. We've got the Conspiracy Journal bookshop where you can get the book a little bit less than you can get on Amazon, but we get a little bit more. We get a little bit more money if you buy it directly from us than if you bought it from Amazon. I know most people don't really care, but if we make a little extra money off of this, then we can turn around and make more books. Which is something that all of us, Tim Beckley, Sean Castile, everybody else who writes for Inner Light Global Communication, if we're able to get the proceeds from one book, then that helps us write and produce another one. So it's either way, Amazon or from our website, conspiracyjournal.com. Either way, we just want people to read our books and to enjoy them. That's the main thing. We love writing these things. We love doing the research and then the investigation. And if we make a little money off of this, then that's great too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with making a little money, off of these books. For a lot of us, that is our job. I just encourage you, our listeners, if you're interested in what we were talking about tonight, check the book out for yourself, because we didn't talk about how this ended, and there is an ending to it, and it may surprise you. So get the book and find out for yourself.
Okay, Tim, what's your next project?
Well, right now, I'm helping Tim Beckley and Sean Castile put together a new book about UFO locations. Locations around the world which have seen activity constantly, so to speak. Desert locations, the Mojave Desert, places like that. It's the working title is UFO Strongholds, and it should be finished in the next couple of weeks, and then maybe up for sale by the end of March or maybe the beginning of April. And it's going to be a really good book. I mean, got a lot of good authors contributed to this book. Like I said, Sean Castile, myself, Tim Beckley, and so that's our next project coming on. And after that, we're putting together a new book about poltergeist and hauntings that aren't necessarily friendly. Not like any of them really are, but this deals more with some of the more dangerous situations. And, that one is a few months down the line.
Well, Tim, was giving me the notification that we have probably less than 2 minutes now, probably closer to a minute. I just really enjoyed Gef the Talking Mongoose. I thought it was a thorough investigation. It was well done. I think the listeners would be captivated by it. I think everyone involved in it did an excellent job. So wish you the best of luck on getting the word out about
Hey, Mark,
this excellent book.